Mr. President, I appreciate
Senator from Colorado.
the Senator from Maryland's patience with us. This is a spirited debate, important set of amendments being offered today. I want to rise in opposition to Amendment 753, which has been offered by the Senator from New Hampshire, Ms. Ayotte. Now, I enjoy working with Senator Ayotte on the Armed Services Committee, and I appreciate her contributions to the committee. But I have to say I strongly disagree with her amendment. Senator Ayotte's amendment would prohibit the United States from trying enemy combatants in Article III civilian courts. These courts refer to Article III of our United States Constitution. Our Article III courts, as the presiding officer knows, are the envy of the world. And while there is a role for military tribunals, they are certainly not the only solution. And frankly, by prohibiting the use of Article III courts, we may actually hinder our efforts to bring terrorists to justice. The Ayotte amendment would put the military smack in the middle of our domestic law enforcement efforts in our fight against extremist terrorists. My friend from New Hampshire argues that this is a war that should be prosecuted by our military, but the reality is that in many cases the best course of action is for our domestic law enforcement, the FBI, and others to take the lead. This amendment would prevent the Department of Justice from questioning or prosecuting terrorists caught on U.S. soil engaged in a criminal act of terrorism, and it would prevent federal prosecutors from bringing these terrorists to justice in so-called Article III courts. Federal prosecutors, Mr. President, have tried, convicted, and imprisoned hundreds of terrorists in Article III courts. The Department of Defense has obtained only six convictions in military tribunals. DOD's job is to track down, kill, or capture those who would harm America or our citizens. They do an incredible job of that. And we all stand in awe of the work that they do to keep us safe. But it's not the Department of Defense's job to try each and every one of those individuals. It's a mission they don't want, and they would have to radically change their entire system to accommodate prisoners that are already handled by civilian courts. Article III courts have kept Americans safe for over 200 years. And I have to say, I just don't believe that it's prudent to build a new judicial system from scratch in order to meet objectives that are already being met. For example, Umar Farouk Abdul Muttalib, also known as the underwear bomber, was arrested in Detroit after trying to set off an explosive on an airplane. He was read his rights, questioned, prosecuted, and he recently pled guilty. Under this amendment, the FBI would have had to call in the military to detain Abdul Muttalib without any resolution in his case. And in fact, and I think this is an extremely important point, under this amendment, Abdul Muttalib would have been given complete immunity from criminal federal prosecution. Further, if this amendment passes, our allies may well refuse to extradite terrorist suspects to the United States. And if military commissions are determined to someday not have jurisdiction over these terrorists or invalidated by the Supreme Court, which, by the way, has happened in other settings in the Supreme Court, there would be no way ever to prosecute these high-value foreign terrorism suspects because of this amendment. Well, what would that mean, Mr. President? Well, this would mean no conviction of the blind sheikh who planned the first World Trade Center attack, no conviction of Moussaoui, the 20th hijacker on 9/11, and no convictions of the East Africa embassy bombers, all of whom were convicted in Article III courts. Again, the Ayotte amendment, however well intended, would provide 100% immunity from federal prosecution to suspected terrorists and eviscerate a very effective tool in our counterterrorism portfolio. This doesn't strike me as being as tough as we possibly could be on terrorists. Mr. President, the fact is that the prosecutors at the Department of Justice have numerous federal criminal laws at their disposal with which to charge suspected terrorists. The federal courts have more than 200 years of precedent to guide them, while tribunals have almost none. And as I've said, our federal prosecutors have had great success so far. So, in summary, I urge my colleagues to vote against Amendment 753. It's simply not necessary, and I believe it will do more harm than good while subverting the finest justice system in the world in the process. And as I yield, Mr. President, let me be clear that I wholeheartedly support the underlying bill that's been so ably authored by Senator Mikulski and others, but I have to oppose this amendment.